Wrestling fans. Another one from Uncle Dave. February 17, 1992 Observer Newsletter, Florida votes on steroid testing. Buzz Sawyer dead. More awards. By Observer staff. Just days after the Florida state legislature voted down the bill to implement steroid testing of pro wrestlers, World Championship Wrestling Executive Vice President Kip Frey announced the promotion would be announcing an anti-steroid policy within the next week. No details about the policy were available at press time, but it will include wrestlers making public service anti-steroid promos on television. Hopefully Frey, who is a newcomer to the wrestling world, will realize the touchiness involved in this issue and not try to have wrestlers who have achieved the spotlight partially through the use of steroids, which covers a lot of ground, to then make statements that give one the impression they would never touch the stuff. Frey also said in comments for this coming Sunday's Miami Herald that WCW would be instituting a policy to post signs in front of arenas when advertised talent isn't going to appear. The bill to regulate pro wrestling in the state of Florida, which would have included mandatory random steroid testing in all promotions that operate in the state, was voted down by an 8-1 margin by the State Committee on Regulated Industries this past Friday. Even in defeat, the bill garnered a decent amount of media publicity throughout the state of Florida to the issue of steroid use and false advertising in pro wrestling. The bill's defeat, which was largely expected all along, can be attributed to many things. The most notable of them was a heavy lobbying effort by veteran Florida lobbyist James Tilman, hired by the World Wrestling Federation to torpedo the bill, and a general lack of respect for the subject of pro wrestling by the committee. From the beginning, several legislators simply judged the merits of regulating pro wrestling on whether or not it was real or fake, and once it was established as, in those parameters, fake, there was a prevalent attitude that the subject therefore wasn't worthy of serious discussion. Legislative analyst Janet Clark proposed the idea of regulating pro wrestling in a lengthy report prepared in October, which led to a committee meeting in early November which most heavily emphasized, in fact if anything overemphasized, the issue of anabolic steroid use in pro wrestling. The meeting secondarily covered the blatant false advertising of both the WWF and WCW. The meeting included testimony from former wrestler Bob Roop, myself and Mary Lou Gantner, mother of former wrestler Ed Gantner, who committed suicide on December 31, 1990, which she blamed on his longtime steroid problem. The committee agreed after the November meeting to allow Don Hazelton, who headed the Florida State Athletic Commission, which governs professional boxing and kickboxing, to author a bill. Perhaps the most telling sign from my perspective about just how little is known about steroids within the general public, or perhaps better stated how much of a generation gap there is on the subject, was after the meeting speaking with Hazelton and a few of the legislators on the subject of steroids. One asked me whether or not I thought Lee Haney or Arnold Schwarzenegger had ever used steroids. The bill, as discussed here, had many problems because too much of the legislation proposed involved placing the standards imposed on pro boxing and kickboxing to pro wrestling. In many cases they aren't applicable since you can apply standards of competitive sports to something that is best labeled as athletic entertainment. It was clear that bill wouldn't pass, nor should it have, even though the bylaws in many ways were similar to antiquated and unapplicable laws in other states. Over the last 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing in which the bill would be voted on, many political maneuverings were going back and forth. Clark rewrote the bill as a bare-bones measure, eliminating virtually everything discussed and criticized in these pages about the original amendments, with the exception of what some would construe as needed measures regarding the two major issues discussed at the original meeting and the subject of blading. The new legislation would have no longer required licensing of and licensing fees to be paid to the commission by ring officials. All wrestlers would have to be licensed with the commission so that their names would be on file for the random anabolic steroid and street drug tests. However, there would be no licensing or registration fee. Promoters would be charged an annual fee for a promoter's license. If the promoter averaged more than 1,000 paying spectators per event in Florida over the previous year, his license fee would be $1,000, which would mean only WWF and WCW. All others wishing to promote would have to pay $250 for a promoter's license. There would be a 5% tax on all live gates. The original bill included taxes not only on live gates, but also on gimmicks sold at live events and pay-per-view revenue from systems within the state. 14 days prior to every live show, the promotion would have to file an intended card with the commission, which would be the same as the card being advertised either in newspaper/radio ads or on television. Any changes in the card would be required at the live event to be posted in front of the building before the show and specifically announced before the card begins. Announcements that refunds are being offered over the PA must be made at least twice during the show. The commission has a right to ask promoters to place a $3,000 or greater performance bond to be used in case of skipping town without paying bills, due to the incident involving Herb Abrams' beach brawl show this past June. Blading was strictly prohibited, with punishment being a $5,000 fine for first instance and possible suspension of the promoter's license for repeated offenses. Mandatory steroid testing. The promotions would be not only allowed to, but required to handle the testing themselves, but must give the state an accounting of the drug tests. If there is evidence of falsifying tests, then the state has the right to take over the testing. The bill's only opposition came from wrestling promoters. The WWF, which at one point threatened to pull out of the state if the bill was passed, was the only one to pay a lobbyist to try and kill the bill. WCW, in a meeting the previous week, decided that they would also pull out of the state if the bill was passed, with a threat being made to pull the May 19th Wrestle War pay-per-view show out of Jacksonville. WCW cited the 5% tax as the reason for pulling out, although that seemed to be a cover reason since the world of public relations doesn't allow one to admit that the company realized many of its main event wrestlers couldn't pass unannounced random steroid tests, and the risk it provided if tests were implemented by an outside body. Both the WWF and our WWF regularly run shows in Illinois, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, and Oregon, where the commission gate tax runs anywhere from 6 to 10%, and some cities, when a city amusement tax is added in, live gates from both groups can be taxed up to 16%, and neither group has pulled out of any of those cities or states. There was talk over the past week of pulling the sales tax in order to eliminate the cover reason for opposition to the bill and put the onus on support or opposition into forcing the companies into a public pro-steroids versus anti-steroids stance, not through rhetoric but by their own actions. However, that idea was vetoed because it was felt it would have doomed the bill, because the legislature wouldn't have spent time discussing or considering, let alone passing, a bill that didn't generate revenue for the state. There was also talk, mainly a last-ditch effort when it became obvious the bill wasn't going to pass, of trying to backdoor the steroid legislation, writing it into another bill regarding gaming or pari-mutuals that would pass, and the steroids and wrestling regulation would go into law that way. But those opposed forced the issue to be voted on Friday. As it was, one of the major reasons the bill was voted down was because some committee members felt the amount of revenue the state projected to net from regulating wrestling, about $70,000 per year, wasn't enough to warrant spending time discussing the issue. So rather than the actual merits of the bill being discussed and analyzed, it boiled down to both a simple dollars and cents issue that the tax wouldn't create enough new revenue, combined with an intense lobbying effort by one side on a subject in which there was no economic support group on the other side. The bill was allotted 30 minutes of discussion time, taken up exclusively by Tilman, Alex Mervis of the Miami Herald, whose late June story on anabolic steroids in pro wrestling served as the catalyst for Clark's starting the ball rolling on regulating wrestling because of the alleged steroid problem, and 3-count newsletter was there to speak for the bill. Former wrestler superstar Billy Graham sent a videotape message to the committee with his thoughts on the anabolic steroid aspect of the bill and problems within the business. Because of the time limit, neither voice was heard. It should be pointed out that in the original hearing in November, 2 speakers opposing the bill, independent promoter Henry Raines, Suncoast Pro Wrestling, and Tillman, weren't allowed to speak because of similar time restrictions. While the bill isn't technically dead, as it can be brought up once again in the fall, it's extremely unlikely to get any farther given the margin of the defeat. Tilman, speaking on behalf of the WWF, tried to present pro wrestling in the silliest terms possible, since the real versus fake issues seemed the most critical to most of the legislators. Wrestling is not a professional sport. It's sports entertainment. It's no different than the circus or a Willie Nelson concert. Wrestlers come to town, get into their costume, paint up their faces. It's all choreographed. The outcome of the matches is generally well known in advance by the audience. Tilman talked about wrestlers fighting each other with snakes, matches with dueling songs playing in the background as the wrestlers exchanged advantages, and other silliness that even the WWF hasn't stretched the limits to yet, as the norm in today's wrestling fare. He called the WWF a family-owned business since the 1920s. In reality, the WWF, then called WWF, wasn't formed until 1963. Titan Sports wasn't even formed until 1982, although Vince McMahon Sr.'s Capital Wrestling Corporation dates back to the late 1950s when McMahon took over Tootsmont's territory, and it wasn't until around 1983 when the business was wholly owned by the McMahon family, when Vince Jr. bought out the minority ownership of Gorilla Monsoon, Phil Zacco, and others. Tillman admitted the WWF was guilty of false advertising but said, "The WWF wants to stop that, and I believe they will." He also said the WWF doesn't allow its wrestlers to cut themselves, in reference to blading. While blading is quite rare in the WWF and has been for a few years, there are occasions such as the Marty Jannetty/Shawn Michaels angle from last month, or a half-dozen Hulk Hogan matches where it does take place under the auspices of the WWF. At one point, a legislator asked Tilman if it would be okay if they eliminated the gate tax and steroid legislation, and just kept the false advertising and blatant clauses, and Tilman said, no, and the attempt to pass an even more limited bill was withdrawn. About steroids, Tilman said, there's no doubt about the use of anabolic steroids in wrestling. Regulating wrestling is not going to solve the steroid problem until the state of Florida and the law enforcement agencies get serious about it. The WWF has a recognized drug testing program. They've had it since June 1987. Up until last summer, there was no valid way to test for steroids. In reality, the steroid testing procedure used by implementing gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, GC/MS, was first implemented in 1983, and little has changed with the procedure since. Drug gurus and steroid experts have had 8 years' experience in finding and exploiting the flaws in the system. Tillman also noted that some of the biggest abusers of steroids are the law enforcement officers themselves. Before the vote, several representatives gave their views on the legislation. The lone supporter, Representative Norman Ostarow, the committee chairman, said, the amendment regarding false advertising is an instant remedy. You don't have to go anywhere to sue anybody. You just have to ask for your money back. That's fair to the public. Regarding steroids, because of their, wrestlers, high visibility, they shouldn't have steroid use. We have heard testimony that wrestlers could not get off steroids because their federation said they had to keep up the use to build up their muscles. That's the wrong image the state needs to show. This bill doesn't regulate the industry, it only regulates the abuses within the industry. Representative Sam Mitchell countered by saying, I don't see a need at this stage of game for regulation. You're telling me we'll get $142,000 in from the gate tax, and we'll spend $72,000 to add a commission member. We're spending a lot of time sitting around this table talking about an insignificant thing. Why do we want to regulate something that doesn't need regulation? Representative George Albright concurred, saying, it's not much of a sport. I just think we should quit getting into every facet of people's lives. This is entertainment. It's out there for the little guy. Added Representative Ron Silver, government has so many things to do right now, and I think you have to prioritize somewhere. There were some good points brought up. Maybe at a different place at a different time we need to address it. After the defeat, Hazelton said that the false advertising aspect is an important one. Steroids is an issue where Mr. Tillman is abundantly correct. It's all over the place. But they are incorrect when they say states' attorneys won't do anything about false advertising or anything else. They may not. But the State Athletic Commission does. We've gone to the mat with Don King and Bob Arum and we always win. We find people and make them get in line. We're one of the most stringent states on boxing. We think we have the ability to do that as far as wrestling is concerned. Maybe not this year, but maybe down the road. Most overrated. Sid Justice. Hulk Hogan. Van Hammer. Ultimate Warrior. El Gigante. Honorable mention, Sting 198, Sergeant Slaughter 155, Lex Luger 148, PN News 127, Warlord 108, Oz 107, Roddy Piper 105, Dustin Rhodes 101. Previous winners: 1980, Mr. Wrestling 2. 1981, Pedro Morales. 1982, Pedro Morales. 1983, Bob Backlund. 1984, Big John Studd. 1985, Hulk Hogan. 1986, Hulk Hogan. 1987, Dusty Rhodes. 1988, Dusty Rhodes. 1989, Ultimate Warrior. 1990, Ultimate Warrior. John McAdam. I will concede that Dustin Rhodes is not a bad wrestler. But his interviews are terrible and he lacks in charisma. If WCW wanted to push a young lion, there were many more deserving, with Brian Pillman coming immediately to mind. But which one got the tag team title and which one got the banana suit? There's no way Dustin deserves the treatment he got from his father, and if you disagree, why don't you count how many jobs he did during 1991? Teresa DiMarie. When you consider he can't talk, wrestle, and has no interesting facet of personality, you have to wonder why Sid Justice even has a job, let alone a major push and being a future world champion. Mystery. It's hard to limit it to just 3 because there are too many. Bug Justice takes the cake for being mega hyped by both major promotions while at the same time being just about the worst worker on each circuit. Andy Thurston, Sid Justice, and some people actually like this stiff. Bob Clausen. The fact that Sergeant Slaughter was a world champion this year makes him the winner. Most underrated. Terrence Taylor. Naoki Sano. Brian Pillman. Brad Armstrong. Bobby Eaton. Honorable mention, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi 297, Ricky Steamboat 174, Cactus Jack 156, Dushin Liger 149, Owen Hart 128, Kenna Kobashi 125, Billy Black 112, Shawn Michaels 98, Pegasus Kid 83, Akira Nagami 81, Kato 80. Previous winners: 1980, Iron Sheik; 1981, Buzz Sawyer; 1982, Adrian Adonis; 1983, Dynamite Kid; 1984, Ryan Blair; 1985, Bobby Eaton; 1986, Bobby Eaton; 1987, Brad Armstrong; 1988, Tiger Mask, Mitsuharu Misawa; 1989, Dan Crawford; 1990, Bobby Eaton. John Muse: underrated is when you're a top worker and you're putting over local wrestlers for no good reason. Underrated is Terry Taylor. Michael McGowan: I feel sorry for Brad Armstrong. The Candyman gimmick was corny, but it wasn't that bad. Fantasia was WCW's version of the gobbledygooker, but at least it wrestled. I like Bad Street because he got to wrestle as a heel, but Arachnaman has got to go. Armstrong must be cursed. Gabriel Daigle: Brian Pillman is so misused. He's the Rodney Dangerfield of WCW. He and Scott Steiner should be the young guys they build the franchise around, but instead they screw him over at every turn, give him a light heavyweight title in a poor excuse for a tournament, and then make sure everyone knows the belt is worthless as he becomes a jobber on TV. Chris Zavisa: Tommy Rogers is one of this country's best wrestlers. It speaks volumes for the state of wrestling in this country that he never works in this country. Bill Strong: when Sid Vicious left WCW, he complained that he did more jobs than Tim Horner. He was wrong. The one who did more jobs was Terry Taylor. Best promotion: All Japan, New Japan, All Japan Women, WWF, WCW. Honorable mention: FMW 277, Tri-State Wrestling 255, Global Wrestling Federation 152, EMLL 117. Previous winners: 1983, Jim Crockett Promotions; 1984, New Japan Pro Wrestling; 1985, All Japan Pro Wrestling; 1986, Universal Wrestling Federation US; 1987, New Japan Pro Wrestling; 1988, New Japan Pro Wrestling; 1989, Universal Wrestling Federation Japan; 1990, All Japan Pro Wrestling. Eddie Goldman: All Japan has the potential to be a major US promotion if it wants to. Mystery: All Japan Women has always had shows filled with 3-star plus matches with everyone putting out 100% in their match. When you watch their cards you know that there's nothing left to ask for. Bobby Yates: there isn't a promotion that can touch All Japan Women. They have so much talent that even if they wanted to waste it, they couldn't. Paul Hanlon: a bad All Japan Women's card is miles ahead of the Bissett show you'd see in the US. Dan Leonard: they may be the most predictable, but All Japan also puts on the best cards and matches in the world night after night. Best television show: All Japan, New Japan, WWF Superstars, WCW Saturday Night, WWF Prime Time. Honorable mention: Global Supercard 201, USWA Memphis Wrestling 180, WCW Main Event 158, Television Lucha Libre 93, Portland Wrestling 80. Previous winners: 1983, New Japan Pro Wrestling; 1984, New Japan Pro Wrestling; 1985, Mid-South Wrestling; 1986, UWF Wrestling US; 1987, CWA 90-Minute Memphis Show; 1988, New Japan Pro Wrestling; 1989, All Japan Pro Wrestling; 1990, All Japan Pro Wrestling. Teresa Demery: when it comes to 1 hour of marketing mania on television, you can't beat Superstars of Wrestling. The matches generally suck, but they do throw you a bone during sweeps, and the commentary with Randy Savage and Roddy Piper was entertaining enough to ignore the wrestling. Andy Stowell: New Japan has exciting opens, interesting vignettes that you don't even have to understand Japanese to enjoy, and great matches in hot arenas. The footage of Riki Choshu visiting kids in the hospital last summer was really touching without coming off the least big heavy-handed like a US promotion would do. New Japan is always the first show I watch when tapes come in the mail. Evan Schlesinger: All Japan is pure Japanese-style wrestling at its best. PPP Pro Wrestling News is a great segment, and even though I can't understand a word of it, I still love it. Steve Sims: All Japan Pro Wrestling tops a great year of Japanese wrestling on television. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give All Japan a 9.5 for the year. Mystery to WMC show in Memphis is the most fun to watch each week because you never know what's going to happen. Guys turn back and forth every week, new wrestlers are always coming and going, and Eric Embry really cracks me up. Match of the year: Steiners vs. Hayes and Sasaki. March 21, Tokyo. Bull Nakano vs. Akira Hokuto. January 4, Tokyo. Flair Zbyszko Vicious Wyndham vs. Steiners Sting Pillman. War Games February 24, Phoenix. Cactus Jack vs. Eddie Gilbert. August 3, Philadelphia. Steiners vs. Sting and Lex Luger. May 19, St. Petersburg. Previous winners: 1980 Bob Backlund vs. Ken Patera. 1981 Pat Patterson vs. Sergeant Slaughter. 1982 Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama vs. Dynamite Kid. 1983 Ric Flair vs. Harley Race. 1984 Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts vs. Kevin and Kerry and Mike Von Erich. 1985 Tiger Mask, Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Kunyaki Kobayashi. 1986 Ric Flair vs. Barry Windham. 1987 Ricky Steamboat vs. Randy Savage. 1988 Ric Flair vs. Sting. 1989 Ric Flair vs. Ricky Steamboat. 1990 Jushin Liger vs. Naoki Sano. Frank Strom, Steiners vs. Hiroshi Hazi and Kensuke Sasaki from the Tokyo Dome was a dream match come true. 4 of the best working up to their potential. The action never let up. I saw the unedited version from Japan. It was amazing how many great moves WCW cut out of their American pay-per-view version. John Muse, the April 20th Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada and Kenta Kobashi vs. Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao and Masafuchi match blew away every other great match this year. It was 52 minutes of non-stop action and great drama. This was the best match I've seen since the Flair Steamboat New Orleans match. Michael McGowan, the War Games from Phoenix, was the most intense match I'd seen in ages. There was so much action that the camera could barely follow it. Gabriel Daigle, the War Games, was over 20 minutes of non-stop action that reminded me of how great wrestling can be at its best. Chris Zavisa, the best matches since Flair vs. Steamboat have consistently been those matches involving Misawa and Tsuruta. Not a week went by without them having at least one 4-star match somewhere in Japan. We were lucky enough to see many of them on television. The longest and the best of them was the 52-minute effort on April 20th that had the fans chanting the names of the competitors and even the promoter long after the match ended. Manager of the Year: Sensational Sherri. Paul Bearer. Paul E. Dangerously. Bobby Heenan. Jim Cornette. Honorable mention: Jimmy Hart 144, Theodore Long 143. Previous winners: 1983, Jimmy Hart. 1984, Jimmy Hart. 1985, Jim Cornette. 1986, Jim Cornette. 1987, Jim Cornette. 1988, Jim Cornette. 1989, Jim Cornette. 1990, Jim Cornette. Mitch Nakagawa, Paul Bearer, because anything related to The Undertaker is a winner. Mystery: Paul Bearer is part of the reason The Undertaker is so over, and without him I doubt Undertaker would be a top draw. Mike Omonski, Jimmy Hart emerged as the WWF's best manager, and he can make weak sells like Typhoon and Bravo into credible heels and add to already strong acts. Jeff Cohen, Sherri's job was made easier by the fact she managed 2 extraordinary talents in Randy Savage and Ted DiBiase. Paul Hanlon, Paul Bearer might sound like Mickey Mouse on LSD, but he was also beyond great. I never knew Percy Pringle had it in him. More tragic news hit the world of pro wrestling this past week when former pro wrestler Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer died on Friday, February 7, at the age of 32. One of the greatest pure athletes in the business during the 1980s, Sawyer's career was mixed with acknowledgement by his peers as one of the best workers around, but also well known as a person whose inability to control excesses kept him from maintaining the superstardom level his physical talents gave him the potential to attain. It was a level that he did achieve early in his career before his 22nd birthday. Despite his smallish stature by pro wrestling standards, Sawyer was generally regarded as one of the toughest men in the profession. According to the Sacramento coroner's office, Sawyer was found by his live-in girlfriend passed out in the front yard of his home in the capital city of California. She called 911 and he was rushed to Mercy San Juan Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. Results of the autopsy were unavailable at press time, but it is believed Sawyer died of a drug overdose. Sawyer, born Bruce Wien on June 14, 1959, grew up in St. Petersburg and was an outstanding high school wrestler. As a high school junior in 1976, he placed third in the nation in the Junior Teenage Nationals in the 191.5-pound weight class. He broke into the wrestling business right out of high school, and even as a rookie in Florida in 1979, he captured several National Rookie of the Year awards. He wowed veteran wrestlers with his incredible physical gifts. In his youth, Sawyer was a compact powerhouse at 5'9.5" and 235 pounds, built along the lines of Rick Steiner, who in many ways emulated Sawyer's ring style when Rick Steiner was a rookie and Sawyer was a main event heel in the old Mid-South wrestling promotion, and Bill Watts put the two together often as a tag team so Steiner could learn to perfect a style to take advantage of his similar physical gifts. He combined that with leaping ability that belied his squatty dimensions, similar to Doug Furnace, and incredible mid-air agility. He invented and perfected a flying power slam maneuver used nowadays by Kensuke Sasaki, but not even Sasaki could match the precision Sawyer had with the move in the early 1980s before injuries started taking their toll. Those physical talents combined with a cactus jack-like willingness to take psychotic bumps made him one of the country's wildest and best workers after just 2 years in the business. Sawyer held tag team titles early in his career with partner Matt Bourne, now Big Josh in WCW, in Oregon and the Carolinas, and later in World Class. He made his biggest national name in the early 1980s in Georgia with a bloody feud with Tommy Rich. He was named by the Wrestling Observer as Most Underrated Wrestler in 1981 and Heel of the Year in 1982. His feud with Rich, which came close to legendary proportions, finished second in Feud of the Year for 1982. However, injuries suffered from his reckless in-ring style combined with other personal demons kept him from reaching the top 10 in the world status of worker level he seemed destined to achieve. He was one of the original raids by Vince McMahon Jr. when the WWF expanded nationally in 1984, but he was also one of the first raiders to be fired. He bounced in and out of the business for the next several years, never lasting anywhere for any major length of time, although he was a headliner and top heel for such major promotions as Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling, World Class Championship Wrestling, World Championship Wrestling when Ric Flair was Booker, and had a few years as a regular headliner with New Japan Pro Wrestling. In all cases, his in-ring work was super, but he wound up being fired. He'd always resurface somewhere else a few months later, minus even more hair and with another 10 pounds of added body weight. But whenever and wherever he was rehired, when he got down to working, he'd stay with the best in any territory. He was a particular longtime favorite of many-time Atlanta booker Ole Anderson, who gave him his first shot at superstardom. Sawyer hadn't worked for a major promotion regularly since he broke his wrist doing a splash off the top rope while working the Wrestle War pay-per-view show in Greensboro on February 25, 1990, and was fired by Jim Hurt a few weeks later. He worked a few California dates for WCW in early 1991, and got the biggest reaction on cards in Los Angeles and San Francisco despite being off television for nearly 1 year. By this time he appeared to weigh in the 280 range. While he still took great bumps, he had very limited stamina. His excesses aged him rapidly, because he easily looked 10 years older than he really was. Sawyer, who along with younger brother Brett, now 31, who also wrestled during the 1980s, had been living in Sacramento for the past few years and had run a pro wrestling school. Buzz trained several men, most notable of them current WCW assistant booker Magnum TA, to become wrestlers. The coroner stated that he had severe alcohol and drug problems during the last years of his life. In a major surprise, the Legion of Doom dropped the WWF Tag Team titles on Friday night, February 7, in Denver to Ted DiBiase and IRS, Mike Rotunda. While it was somewhat well known on the inside that there would be a title switch involving the two teams before WrestleMania, the fact that it happened so abruptly appears to have been a last-minute decision. There was no acknowledgement of it on the WWF weekend television shows, including the Fox special. In fact, the DiBiase and IRS tag team had yet to debut on television. The weekend television shows were still building up future tag team title defenses by Legion of Doom against the Natural Disasters. As the story goes, well, the Legion of Doom did know they were going to lose the belts at some point before WrestleMania to DiBiase and IRS. None of the four knew the change was going to be that specific night or that they would even wrestle one another that night. Legion of Doom versus Disasters and DiBiase and IRS versus Big Boss Man and Tito Santana were the scheduled bouts for the night, until 8 p.m. that night. Supposedly Legion of Doom had been promised there would be no cameras present for the switch. The WWF had a film crew tape the match, although at press time we have no idea when or if it'll ever air. The WWF also taped the house show Bret Hart/Mountie title switch, but it never aired on television, and some people were visibly unhappy about that being the case. It was the first chance the WWF had to get the belts off Legion of Doom since rumors started swirling everywhere of them being ready to jump back to WCW or possibly New Japan when their WWF contract expires in June. Legion of Doom, as the Road Warriors, received one of the most lucrative, at the time, Contracts in pro wrestling history from Jim Crockett, a 3-year deal, $1988.90 for $2,000 per appearance apiece and a guaranteed 250 live dates per year. They quit WCW halfway through the final year of the contract when Jim Herd offered them a reported $156,000 apiece for 1991, which they felt insulted by. At the time, those in charge at WCW felt they were grossly overpaid. Judged by their drawing power at the time, there's no doubt that was the case, so WCW was more than happy to give them a release 6 months before expiration of the deal and allow them to join the WWF. Well, the WWF doesn't guarantee money, so actual salaries are virtually impossible to accurately ascertain, unless you see someone's tax forms. There is no question Legion of Doom didn't make anywhere close to what they were earning with WCW when they hit the big time. And it's hardly a secret that they have been among the most vocal in opposition to the WWF steroid testing policy. With Crockett, who gave them the original super contract, back in a power position in the WCW organization, let's just say there's a lot of smoke right now, even if it may be premature to yell fire. Hawk had been out of action for a few weeks with a hip pointer, and this was the duo's first match back together. Several WWF sources and those close to Legion of Doom insist that they aren't leaving the WWF, and they haven't given notice. But I'd guess chances of them leaving aren't slim. Fans in Denver were told before the changed match by announcer Mel Phillips that Jack Tunney said the Natural Disasters will get no more tag team title shots, so in order to give the fans a tag team title defense they were going to flip-flop the 2 tag team matches. The match lasted 11:49 with the finish coming with Hawk on the top rope about to give Dibiase a clothesline. Sensational Sherri, who won't be managing Dibiase and IRS as a team so I'm told, and will strictly work as manager of Shawn Michaels, who will be getting a big heel push, distracted referee Earl Hebner, while Earthquake and Typhoon rolled down the aisle. Typhoon hit Hawk with a chair and he fell into the ring and was pinned by Dibiase. While nobody seems to know this for sure, it's being widely speculated that Legion of Doom will work against the Disasters at WrestleMania in some kind of gimmick street fight match, while Dibiase and IRS will defend the belts against another babyface team, almost assuredly Sergeant Slaughter and Jim Duggan. At the house shows for the remainder of the weekend in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, the Legion of Doom came to the ring with the belts and still announced as champions and retained the titles against the Disasters, so officially the title won't change hands until they acknowledge it on television. In Sacramento on February 10, Hawk missed the card without explanation or an announcement even though he was in the arena, but Animal came to the ring wearing the tag belt. The WWF ran a Saturday night main event on February 8 on the Fox network after being bounced last summer by NBC. The show was below the quality overall of many of the late-night NBC specials. However, most of the pre-WrestleMania specials have tended to be that way because there is so much emphasis on getting over a WrestleMania-caliber angle that little time is left to much else. While they did try to get far too much over in 60 minutes, while the wrestling was neither good nor bad, the key elements in the show were top-notch. The focus of the show was supposed to be, and turned out to be, the turn of Sid Justice. Forget about his work rate. As a character, he did the best job of his career in regard to facials and interviews in the middle stage of the storyline leading to the Hogan vs. Justice WrestleMania main event. It's pretty clear that they are going to exploit the July 4, 1990 boating accident injuries suffered by Brutus Beefcake for all they're worth to Hype Mania. Poor taste to be sure, but it's not exactly groundbreaking poor taste by pro wrestling standards as compared with last year. The show certainly leads you to expect Justice doing a major attack on Beefcake, causing Hogan, who they alluded to as giving Beefcake a life-saving blood transfusion after the boating accident during the interview the two did together, which I'm almost certain isn't the case, to pull out of the match with Ric Flair to gain revenge for his longtime best friend. It's pretty much the closest thing to the no-holds-barred movie plot when you think about it, since Sid Justice is the closest thing to Zeus, Tiny Lister on stilts, both in physique and wrestling ability. Lister had the closet racist advantage of being black, but Justice at least has a small amount of working ability. And the first pay-per-view with Hogan vs. Zeus was a huge financial success, something like a 4.8% buy rate, a figure that this year's Mania won't come anywhere close to. Beefcake is the closest thing in wrestling to Hogan's brother. Everything on the rest of the show was so rushed that it couldn't have made an impact. 1. Roddy Piper beat the Mountie in 3:24 to keep the Intercontinental title. There was a ref bump at the 2-minute mark. Mountie gave Piper a pile driver and Jimmy Hart grabbed a drink from an official at ringside and gave it to Mountie, who poured it on Piper. Mountie zapped Piper, but it had no effect. Piper threw Hart over the top rope. He took a better bump than most of the WWF wrestlers can, got the shock stick and zapped Mountie for the pin. When it was over, Piper pulled off the shirt he wrestled in and wore a wetsuit underneath it with the words "shock-proof" written on it. Rushed but watchable. 1 1/4 stars. Next up was new and improved Royal Rumble footage as it was supposed to be. Well, visually nothing was different, but the commentary was new, although it was pretended to have been original, to more strongly push Hogan as the face, and the soundtrack was completely different, adding in boos for everything Justice did, a Hogan chant when the fans live were actually booing Hogan, and big cheers for Hogan when the fans were booing him. That's what improved technology is there for, to make sure when the normally Pavlovian reaction isn't there, you erase the original and put it there. They showed a series of interviews with Sid slowly turning heel, an insincere apology, and then a Hogan and Sid interview where Sid walked out when Shawn Mooney talked with Hogan first. 2. Hogan and Justice beat Ric Flair and Undertaker in 11:09 via DQ. This was just a backdrop for the angle. Beefcake was at ringside to combat Mr. Perfect and Paul Bearer in the other corner. The story of the match is that Hogan twice saved Sid when he was in danger of being pinned, but Sid didn't save Hogan when caught in the figure four and Hogan had to reverse it himself. Sid had a heel smirk on his face the whole way and kept refusing to tag Hogan and finally walked out on him. As Beefcake tried to stop him, they put major heat on Beefcake's facial injuries. Beefcake made the save for Hogan, but ducked when they were about to clock him, and Hogan knocked Flair and Undertaker out of the ring. Somewhere in there Flair knocked down the ref for the DQ. Justice did a very effective post-match promo. 2 1/4 stars. 3. Slaughter and Duggan beat Beverly Brothers in 2:37 when Slaughter hit Mike Enos with the scroll and Duggan gave him a spear for the pin. Enos took 2 spin bumps. A better than average squash match. 1 star. 4. Randy Savage pinned Jake Roberts in 5:25 with an elbow drop off the top rope. Savage worked very hard here, and it's the first time I've seen him look good in the ring since last year's Wrestlemania. This at least bodes well for Flair versus Savage, since Savage had looked like he'd lost his ability since his retirement, and that maybe his match with Flair would be a disappointment. But he's still got it, just doesn't show it very often, which means he surely will at Mania. After the match, Roberts was hiding behind the curtain for a tune-in next week tease which will wind up with Undertaker turning. 2 3/4 stars. Whether it's simply coincidence or something else, this was the first major deal where it appeared the WWF steroid policy was having some effect. With one obvious exception, nobody on the show at least appeared to be on steroids. A few might be on, but you sure couldn't tell for certain by their appearance. In fact, there were noticeable physical changes in almost everyone. Piper has dropped a lot of weight in the past month or so, not anyone can't tell because of his outfit. Hogan is so clearly weighed down in both size and muscle tone that it's confirmation of everything that has been written about him previously. Sid seems to be the exception to the rule. Flair looks the same as always. Undertaker's arms, the only body part exposed, are way smaller. Duggan was noticeably fatter, although that could just as easily have absolutely nothing to do with steroids. Slaughter looks the same. Bo Beverly started shrinking a lot back last summer when Vince first talked of steroid testing. Blake Beverly, I've got no idea because he was only in enough to do spin bumps. Roberts' arms look smaller than usual, although he hasn't had a steroid look to him anyway. And Savage has been smaller and covered up since last summer. From syndication, there appears to be differences in several others as well, but there are still a significant percentage that have that steroid look to this day, and wink, wink, maybe we can buy 1 or 2 as being genetic freaks, but there are still more than 1 or 2. Still, the WWF has implemented a policy, no matter how much of a joke certain aspects seem to be and how many lies that have been told along the way, that has at least lowered the amount of steroids that some of the guys have used. So it has been effective in some cases short term. Here's the details on the arrest of Marty Jannetty. Jannetty, 32, was arrested at 2 a.m. on January 25 after an incident at the Yucatan Liquor Stand, a Tampa nightclub. Jannetty and a female companion, Angela Ilaxi, 19, were trying to get in the club, and Ilaxi apparently tried to use a fake ID. When the police tried to arrest her, Jannetty allegedly got involved in the fray and violently grabbed the officer. Jannetty was arrested and he and Ilaxi were both searched, and officers found less than a gram of cocaine on both of them and a twist-tied bag on Jannetty. Jannetty was arrested on possession of cocaine, possession of drug paraphernalia, and resisting arrest with force. Jannetty was then indefinitely suspended by the WWF, with the wrestlers being told that he was fired. So reports of Jannetty failing a drug test appear to be inaccurate. However, Jannetty did appear Sunday night in Japan for his SWS tour booked through the WWF, so either the suspension has already been lifted or some aspect of the suspension was a work on Jannetty and the boys. The Los Angeles Times will be interviewing Billy Graham for a story on anabolic steroids in wrestling on Thursday of this week. Because the Times is looking at giving the story from page play, if the story they run is similar to stories already printed in the New York Post, Miami Herald, and Charleston Courier, it would be a devastating blow for those who had thought the story had already run its course. Big play by both the Times and the San Diego Union, which also has a major pro wrestling piece, probably within the next 2 weeks, focusing on steroids and wrestling, will lead to far more television and newspaper items on the subject nationwide. At last word, it appeared the San Diego story may have a lot more serious charges in other directions. This is the first issue of the current 4-issue set. If you've got A1 on your address label, it means that your Observer subscription will expire in 3 more weeks. Renewal rates remain $6 for 4 issues, $12 for 8, $24 for 16, $36 for 24, $48 for 32 up through $60 for 40 issues within the United States and Canada. Rates for overseas airmail subscriptions are $9 for each set of 4 issues up through $90 for 40 issues. All subscription renewals, letters to the editor, news items, reports of live shows and any other correspondence related to this newsletter should be sent to the Wrestling Observer Newsletter, P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. Fax messages can be sent to the Observer at 408-378-6562 afternoon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific on a daily basis. EMLL. The return to Arena Mexico in Mexico City on January 31st drew almost 15,000 fans for the best show in a while as Los Brazos, Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata and El Brazo won 2 out of 3 falls from the Untouchables, Pierre Roth Jr. and Jacques Mate in Massacre, in 9:39 2 3/4 stars. Real good but rushed. Ultimate Dragon won a non-title match from CMLL middleweight champion Blue Panther in 12:49. This was a super match with lots of hot moves. Dragon was accompanied to ringside by Monacan and Mamakan aka Mariko Yoshida and Mima Shimoda from All Japan Women, who are now working full-time here. Even though Dragon is the face, the fans cheered Panther more, although both worked the match as babyfaces, and third fall was super with all kinds of near falls and Dragon debuting the Monkey Special, a German suplex rolled into a reverse cradle, for the win, which should set up a title match down the line. 4 stars, Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Sam and Grundy beat Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 in 2 out of 3 falls. Third fall finish saw Caras give Sam and Grundy a low blow behind the ref's back, which brought out Aaron Grundy, Mike Shaw aka Norman the Lunatic, who behind the ref's back gave a big splash onto both Caras and Mascara Año 2001 and 1/2 star. In main event saw Octagon retain the Mexican middleweight title going to a double disqualification with Fuerza Guerrera in 21:37. Finish saw Guerrera take a bump out of the ring. When Octagon took off for his dive, Guerrera was facing the audience as they created a new move. Octagon dove through and caught Guerrera in a bulldog headlock into the front row of seats. Incredible. At this point both Cien Caras and Conan both interfered for the double DQ and brawled all over the place. 3¼ stars. After the match, Guerrera, during his interview, called the decision a travesty and said that an anabolic warrior such as Conan, who doesn't look like an anabolic warrior all anymore, should keep his nose out of his business. Since the Galavision shows now air the Friday night cards on a 9-day delay rather than a 2-day delay as before, those of you with dishes, I do know that the show goes up sometime on Saturday, or 8 days before airtime in the United States. It appears that Jose Luis Feliciano, Chuel Guerrero, Black Terry, Negro Navarro and Shuchito Hamada are ready to jump from UWA, and that the long-rumored jump of UWA middleweight champion Negro Casas, generally considered the country's best worker, is imminent. This Friday night's Arena Mexico card will probably be headlined by Bestia Salvaje vs Huracan Sevilla in a hair versus hair match. Aaron Grundy is already over more in less than 2 weeks than Salomon Grundy, and they may break them up and push Aaron with a new character. Just as was the case in the US a few years ago and still is today, there are a growing number of heel fans at both promotions shows in Mexico City, which is why so many of the faces get so roundly booed. Guerrera is super over with those fans in particular. Anyway, as is usually the case, they are the most hardcore and most organized, so they sit near the TV mics and get the ringside seats and camera range, which is why it's so noticeable on television even when they draw a huge house. January 25th at Arena Pista Revolucion in Mexico City saw Guerrera beat Octagon via DQ when Octagon faked a non-existent low blow and heel ref El Gato Montini called it. January 26th at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw Salomon and Aaron Grundy over Guerrera and Panther in the main event. Must look ridiculous with the 2 400-pounders going against 155-pound Guerrera. Love Machine, Art Barr, is back and managing the Grundy brothers. Yoshida and Shimoda debuted on February 2nd at Arena Pista Revolucion, teaming with Esther Moreno to lose to Martha Villalobos and Pantera Serena and Neftali. The main event on that show was a midgets hair versus hair match with Jurito Estrada beating Ringuido Mendoza via DQ when Estrada threw Mendoza into heel ref El Gato Montini, and he DQ'd Mendoza, who lost his hair. The CMLL welterweight tournament started on February 1st in Puebla. The February 7th Arena Mexico show, to air on Galavision Sunday, as Universo 2000 and Mascara Año 2000 and Cars vs. Conan and Grundy Brothers, Pierroth Jr. and Nitron and Guerrera vs. Mascara Sagrada and Octagon and Canadian Vampire Casanova, Apollo Dantes and Love Machine and Sevilla vs. Salvaje and Kung Fu and Sangre Chicana and Zulima and Shimoda and Yoshida vs. Villalobos and Serena and Wendy. Bull Raider is out of action with a broken ankle. Tony Arce and Vulcano kept the Mexican tag team titles, beating Oro and Plata on February 5th in Tlalnepantla on the El Santo Memorial Show in that city. UWA. Connect's reign as UWA World Heavyweight Champion ended on February 2nd at El Toreo in Naucalpan when he lost 2 of 3 falls to many-time former champion Dos Cars in 27 minutes. Both men worked babyface style and Connect put the belt around Cars' waist after losing the match. Connect had held the title since December 9, 1992 when he won it from Big Van Vader. The crowd was said to be disappointing for the title change card since it was one of the coldest days in the history of Mexico City. El Toreo is outdoors, and they had a bullfight that drew more than 60,000 fans and a soccer game that drew 55,000 fans going head-to-head with the card. Also Dr. Wagner Jr. and Canadian Tiger, Mike Lazansky, and Killer beat Enrique Vera and Solar and El Psicodelico when Killer pinned Vera to set up a UWA Junior Heavyweight title match between the two on February 9th. Coquina and Fishman and Gigante Warrior, Butch Masters, beat Villano 3 and Tinieblas Jr. and Sr., Black Power and Negro Navarro, and El Signo won a non-title match from UWA Trios champs Los Villanos. Scorpio Jr. and Sr. and Kahosai beat Super Raton and Super Pinocchio and Tama the Flying Elephant, and opener saw Samurai, Samu Matsuda, and Ninja Sasuke Masamichi Noku, beat Momotaro, Monkey Magic Wakita, and Ricky Boy. The February 5th card at El Toreo in Naucalpan, which was the annual union benefit show, which means wrestlers from both groups combined, and also El Santo Memorial Night. El Santo died on February 5, 1984, so that day is practically a national holiday in Mexico, drew more than 12,000 fans, best UWA crowd in a long time, as Conan EMLL and Dos Caras, UWA and Pero Aguayo EMLL and Sam and Grundy EMLL, won the main event beating Connect, UWA, and Los Brazos, EMLL via DQ for a low blow by Brazo de Oro on Conan that may or may not have taken place. The match was interesting because the fans booed faces Conan and Grundy practically out of the building and cheered the heels, Connect particularly, like crazy. The fans were hot to see Connect versus Conan because the two had a feud a few years back at El Toreo, and every time Conan tagged in the fans would chant for Connect to tag in against him. Also Ulysses and the Untouchables, Pierroth Jr. and Jacques Maiden Massacre, a la MLL regulars, beat Silver King UWA, and El Texano, UWA, and Anibal EMLL, and Mascara Sagrada, EMLL, in what was said to have been an excellent match, plus Black Terry, UWA, and Babyface, UWA, and Bestia Salvaje, EMLL, beat Blue Demon Jr. EMLL, and Kato Kung Lee, EMLL, and Kendo Star, UWA, Zulima and Janet and Lola Gonzalez beat Neftali and Pantera Serena and Martha Villalobos in a women's match, and Midgets Misteriosito and Angelito Azteca beat Piratita Morgan and MS1 and 2. A correction from last week, in the January 22nd Aguayo vs. El Hijo del Santo match, Santo won via DQ and it wasn't for the title. Promoter Carlos Maines is negotiating to bring back Vader to eventually have a masked versus masked showdown against either Cars and Connect. Santo retained the UWA welterweight title on January 30th in Mexico City, beating Cassandro. Usual rivals Santo and Negro Casas teamed up to main event February 4th in Pachuca against Jose Luis Feliciano and the returning El Espanto Jr. Santo defended his title against Espanto Jr. on February 9th in Nezahualcóyotl. Kendo Star, Kendo in Japan, had a masked versus masked match with El Mexicano 2 on February 9th in San Lorenzo. February 9th at El Toreo was headlined by Enrique Vera defending the UWA Junior Heavyweight title against the Killer Plus Connect and Coquina, and Gigante Warrior vs. Dos Caras and Tinieblas Jr. and Sr., Fishman and Samoan SWAT Team vs. Silver King and Texano and Fantasma, Los Villanos vs. Negro Navarro and El Signo and Black Power in a non-title match in prelims. New Japan. Still no word on the departure of the Blonde Outlaws group, and apparently there is something up regarding Tatsumi Fujinami as well. Fujinami is working this tour, but for some reason is going to sit out the next tour. Norio Onaga of the Blonde Outlaws, all of whom haven't worked this tour at all, came back for one match on February 8th in Sapporo and dropped the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title to Jushin Liger in a title versus title, WCW Light Heavyweight, match. March 1st at the Yokohama Arena. Besides the two old-timer matches listed last week, Seiji Sakaguchi and Shozo Kobayashi vs Tiger Jeet Singh and Umanosuke Ueda and TV announcer Kotetsu Yamamoto, and Kantaro Hoshino vs Hiroyoshi Yamamoto and Black Cat. We'll have Antonio Inoki and Osamu Kido vs Riki Choshu and Masa Saito, Keiji Muto and Hiroshi Hazi defending the IWGP Tag Team titles against Big Van Vader and Bam Bam Bigelow. Expect a title change, Masa Chono vs Shinya Hashimoto, Shiro Koshinaka vs Akira Nagami, and Michiyoshi Ohara vs Brian Blair. Liger will miss the Yokohama show because he'll be on the plane back from Super Brawl in Milwaukee. Vader will miss Super Brawl because he'll be on a plane to Tokyo. February 8th in Sapporo drew a sellout 6,500 as Akatoshi Saito, karate man who formerly worked with Wing, knocked out Michiyoshi Ohara in a mixed match in 6:15 which was billed as a shoot. Choshu and Chono beat Bigelow and Rambo when Choshu pinned Rambo. Liger pinned Oniga to win the IWGP Junior title in 17:30. Hazi and Muto kept the IWGP Tag Team titles beating Fujinami and Koshinaka into 20:03 when Hazi pinned Koshinaka with the Northern Lights suplex. Scott Norton pinned Tony Halme, Nagami and Hashimoto beat Brad Armstrong and Pegasus Kid. Chris Benoit, Kengo Kimura and Saito beat Tony St. Clair and Kim Duke and Black Cat, and Hoshino beat Kido and Hiroyoshi Yamamoto. February 5th in Otoru drew 2,510 as Choshu and Saito and Muto beat Armstrong and Rambo and Bigelow. Hashimoto and Chono beat Norton and St. Clair. Scorpio and Duke and Pegasus Kid beat Liger and Koshinaka and Fujinami when Kid pinned Liger. Halme pinned Kimura and Nagami, and Kido beat Hazi and Masashi Aoyagi. February 4th in Hakodate drew a sellout 3,480 as Muto and Hashimoto and Choshu beat Rambo and Norton and Bigelow, and Hashimoto pinned Rambo in 13:37. Hazi and Chono beat Fujinami and Koshinaka. Halme pinned Duke, Kimura and Saito beat Armstrong and St. Clair. Liger and Nagami beat Scorpio and Pegasus Kid, and Aoyagi and Kido beat Ohara and Hoshino. Other Japan notes. Opening night of the SWS Tour on February 9th in Isazaki drew 2,950 as the Natural Powers, Yoshiaki Yatsu and King Haku, beat Takashi Ishikawa and Samson Fuyuki in 1958 as part of the SWS Tag Team title tournament. In another tournament match, Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara beat Kendo Nagasaki and Kenichi Oya in 13:18. Naoki Sano retained the WWF/SWS Junior Heavyweight title, pinning Marty Jannetty in 7:18 with a rolling cradle. George and Shunji Takano beat Shinichi Nakano and Tatsumi Kitahara in a tournament match. Ultimate Dragon and Kato Kung Lee beat Blue Panther and Emilio Charles Jr. when Lee pinned Charles. Davey Boy Smith and Kabuki beat Hercules, and Goro Tsurumi and Masao Orihara pinned Hiroshi Hatanaka. FMW has been packing them in this tour, as on February 8th in Nagasaki they drew 4,825 as Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako beat Big Titan and Horace Boulder in a street fight. Starman Billy Anderson and Blonde Bomber Chris Kunyaki from New Jersey beat Atsushi Onita and Mr. Ganasuke. Katsuji Ueda kept the American Wrestling Alliance light heavyweight title, beating the Shooter, and Sabu pinned Riki Fuji. February 7th in Oita drew 3,565 as Titan and Sabu beat Onita and Asako, Shooter and Goto beat Bomber, and Starman and Boulder pinned Fuji. February 6th in Yanagawa drew 2,246 as Onita and Asako and Shooter beat Starman and Boulder, and Titan in a street fight. Goto pinned Sabu, Fuji pinned Bomber. February 5th in Kumamoto, as part of 2 days in the same arena, drew a sellout 4,572 as Onita and Goto beat Sabu and Titan in 12:13 to retain the WWA World Martial Arts Tag Team titles. Starman and Boulder beat Fuji, and Asako and Bomber beat Eiji Ezaki. February 4th in Kumamoto drew a sellout 4,658 as Onita and Goto and Asako beat Sabu and Boulder and Titan in a barbed wire cage match street fight. Fuji pinned Bomber, Starman pinned Ganasuke. The WMA group folded basically before it ever got started. Ishinriki is now working as a referee for SWS. UWFI has a show this coming Saturday night at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall with Nobuhiko Takada and Kazuo Yamazaki vs Tom Burton and Gary Albright on top, plus Pezwali vs Kiyoshi Tamura and Yoji Angio and Yuki Miyato vs Tatsuo Nakano and Mark Silver. Giant Baba held a press conference to announce the signing of Jun Akiyama, an amateur wrestling champion, 22 years old. The fact that they held a press conference to announce he's going into pro wrestling means they have high hopes for him, and he said that he wanted to debut against Stan Hansen. The February 1st New Japan television show, which aired the Choshu vs Fujinami match from the Tokyo Dome, drew an 8.0 rating, while All Japan's latest six-man tag war, which went 44:53, about 26 minutes of it aired on television, Sunday night drew a 5.6 rating. All Japan Women had a TV taping on February 1st in Takasaki, headlined by Bull Nakano going to a double disqualification with Asia Kong to set up their WWA World title match on April 25th at Wrestlemania. Toshio Yamada and Kyoko Inoue beat Devi Malenko and Seiki Hasegawa. Takako Inoue beat Miori Kamiya to keep the Japanese title, and Suzuka Minami and Yumiko Hata and Minami Toyota beat Akira Hokuto and Benbat Yoshinaga and Tomoko Watanabe. Prelim woman wrestler Mayumi Yamamoto, who never made it big, announced her retirement. PWF on February 24 at Korakuen Hall has Masakatsu Funaki vs. Wayne Shamrock, Minoru Suzuki vs. Jerry Flynn, Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs. Yusuke Fuke and Kazuo Takahashi vs. Bart Vale. They had a photo spread of Akira Maeda with martial arts movie star Jean-Claude Van Damme for the Tokyo opening of Double Impact. Funny to see Maeda just tower over Van Damme size-wise. Among those who are scheduled to tour with All Japan later this year are The Patriot, Del Wilkes, Gary Young, John Tatum, Rod Price, Scott Anthony and the New Black Hearts, Tom Nash and Dave Johnson. Universal announced for March 13 at Korakuen Hall Dos Caras and Gran Hamada and Leo Del Santo vs. El Signo and El Texano and Negro Navarro, the original Death Missionaries reuniting, Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. vs. Kendo and Crush, Los Brazos vs. Rudy Reyna and May Flowers and Pimpinela Escarlata, Punish and Sange Gantetsu vs. Lightning Kid and someone else. March 14 at Korakuen Hall has Caras and Hamada and Gantetsu vs. Texano and Silver King and Crush, Punish vs. Lightning Kid, Santo and Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata vs. Wagner and Navarro and someone else, and El Brazo and Kendo and Signo vs. Flowers and Reyna and Escarlata. UWFI will have a big show on March 17 in Nagoya with Bob Backlund, Albright, Billy Scott, and Burton. USWA. The return of Austin Idol the weekend before last picked business up the biggest it's been in a long time with a $15,000 house on February 2 in Memphis, about 2,500 fans. Normal houses of late have been around $4,000, and a $7,000 house on February 1 in Nashville, normal has been about $2,500. Tom Pritchard won the Southern title from Eric Embry on television on February 8 in Memphis. Embry used a chain on Pritchard when Tony Anthony interfered, and hit Embry with a chain and then put him on top for the pin. They've got a new moon dog who looks to be about 6'5", 350 and is black, called the Big Black Dog. Embry beat up and bodyslammed Dirty White Girl on television again this week. Moondogs tore up the suits of Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett on television. Bart Sawyer and Doug Masters are history. Snowman Eddie Lee Crawford is running independent opposition in Brownsville and Jonesboro headlining shows against Tommy Lane. Richard Lee has a broken arm from his match on February 2 against Jarrett. Wrestling returned to Monday night this week on February 10 with Robert Fuller vs. Tony Falk, Pritchard vs. Brian Christopher for the Texas heavyweight title, Embry vs. Anthony with the winner getting to handcuff the loser to the ropes and give him 10 lashes with a belt, Kimala vs. Coco Ware for the held-up USWA title, a battle royal with 4 teams, Embry and CJ, Anthony and Dirty White Girl, Falk and Miss Jennifer and Pritchard and Miss Texas plus Jarrett and Lawler, and Idol vs. the Moondogs. February 4 in Louisville saw Falk beat Sawyer, Pritchard beat Masters, Christopher beat Falk via DQ. The all-girls battle royal ended without a winner when all the men interfered. Anthony beat Embry via DQ and Moondogs beat Lawler and Jarrett. Global. The February 7 show at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 950 fans. According to 2 sources this past week, there have been a lot more free passes than have been indicated in this newsletter at these recent cards. To see first television show, Jerry Lynn pinned Billy Joe Travis in 4 minutes in a light heavyweight title match. Eddie Gilbert pinned Barry Horowitz using the trunks in the first round of a one-night tournament to get a North American title match, and after the match both men embraced. Scott Putski pinned Sam Houston when Bull Payne attacked Houston going to the ring and worked his leg over with a chair. The injured Houston was pinned by Putski. Black Bart pinned Rattlesnake. Terry Garvin pinned Payne when Houston came to ringside and tripped Payne, who was attempting to suplex Garvin. Houston came to ringside because Samantha had interfered in the match, and Scott Anthony pinned Gary Young after hitting him with a chain. Second television show, none of these bouts were in the tournament. Young and Putski beat Travis and Payne via a foreign object DQ. Horowitz, managed by the expert Bruce Pritchard, won the light heavyweight title from Lynn. Pritchard held Lynn's leg during the 3 count. After the match, the two continued to attack Lynn, and Horowitz drove a chair into Lynn's ankle, which he legitimately injured in Japan a few weeks ago, and he's going to undergo surgery which will keep him out of action for 4 to 6 months. Bruce Force beat Houston and Rattlesnake, and Chaz Taylor pinned Mike Davis in a match where the winner could choose either his opponent or his opponent's tag partner to leave the GWF. Before the match, Davis said that if he wins, then Tug Taylor, Chaz's dad, would have to leave. Chaz won and picked Tom Davis. Tom Burton is having to leave, and he's history for now, while Mike Davis will stay and get a new gimmick and be brought back in about a month. Third television show, back to the tournament. Putski beat Bart via DQ, and Rod Price, who didn't go on the Middle East tour with John Tatum, Bill Irwin and a few others. After all interfered, Garvin drew Anthony, but Garvin advanced by winning the coin flip and Gilbert pinned Putski after hitting him with a gimmick. This left Gilbert versus Garvin with the winner to get the title shot with Dark Patriot, Doug Gilbert. It was a total babyface match with it ended with a double knockout by rookie referee Sam Lowe, Gilbert's ex-manager in Memphis, who will wind up as a heel ref using the name Sam Esposito. Ref James Beard then said the first man to his feet would get the title shot and Gilbert got up first. This left Dark Patriot versus Gilbert in the brother versus brother match for the North American title. A lot of the crowd had left by this point to catch the last bus home at 11 p.m. Pritchard interfered for the DQ and they beat on Eddie until Horowitz came in, but Horowitz then turned on Eddie as well and Anthony joined in and they pounded on Eddie, who juiced first blood since Global came to Dallas, I believe, until Garvin tried to make the save by laying across Gilbert, and they destroyed him until Joe Pedicino grabbed the mic and said if the heels didn't leave then both Horowitz and Dark Patriot would be stripped of the titles. Pritchard took out the bounty poster on Eddie and stuffed it in his mouth. Gilbert wound up doing a stretcher job. February 14th at the Sportatorium has Dark Patriot vs. Gilbert, Bart vs. Mystery Wrestler, probably Bill Irwin, in a bull rope match, Payne vs. Houston, Samantha Payne vs. Rockin' Robin in a lumberjack match, Tatum and Price vs. Chaz and Tug Taylor and Putski vs. Garvin. Stephen Dane and Travis will debut this week as a heel tag team called Fantasy. February 21st looks to be tentatively Patriot, Del Wilkes, versus Dark Patriot for the North American title, and if Patriot wins he gets 5 minutes with Pritchard, Gilbert versus Big Bad John, formerly Body Snatcher, in a bounty match, and if John wins then Eddie must crawl across the ring and kiss Pritchard's feet, and if Gilbert wins, Pritchard must kiss his feet. February 28th is Gilbert and Garvin versus Anthony and Dark Patriot and a 10-man battle royal for the Brass Knucks Championship. The whole thing is being built up for a major show on March 20th with Gilbert and Patriot versus Dark Patriot and Anthony in a cage match. Here and there. Dr. George Zawarian began his 3-year sentence on January 31st on the steroid and controlled substances convictions. The wrestling radio show Who's Slamming Who is back on WPSC-FM in Wayne, New Jersey from 6 to 7 p.m. every Wednesday night. Eddie Mansfield's IWF taped 5 shows on February 1st at Universal Studios in Orlando. The Long Riders, Kip Winchester and Brett Cole, beat the Heartbreakers, Tim Parker and Big Till, to win the IWF Tag Team titles. Blackjack Mulligan was jumped in an interview by Mondo Clean and Juice Like Crazy. Tony Mella suffered a bruised sternum in a tag team match against Thunder and Lightning. At first, since his heart was beating irregularly, it was feared he had suffered a heart attack. I believe Mulligan is moving to Alabama and getting a regular job. Kendall Windham is still serving out his sentence on the counterfeit money conviction but is able to wrestle if he's back in prison by 9 p.m. Buck Robley is starting up a group in Louisiana around New Orleans with Steve Williams, Terry Gordy, Paul Orndorff, Robert Gibson, Butch Reed, Buddy Landell, and Bob Orton. WIN on February 7th in Baltimore drew 650 for the debut show. Scott Anthony was scheduled to wrestle Tom Brandi, but Anthony sent a message he couldn't be there, and while the fans were watching the tape, King Kala attacked Brandi. Neil Superior beat Rasta the Voodoo Man. Brick Bronski and Doug Flex worked as a tag team called the Brat Pack and attacked a local radio announcer before Cream Team made the save, and Lords of Darkness attacked Cream Team. Agent Orange beat Morgus the Maniac, Jeff Collett beat Sledgehammer McGill, Nikolai Volkov beat Honky Tonk Man by a DQ when Volkov was hit with a guitar, Brandi beat Kala to win the Pacific title, and Misty Blue beat Linda Dallas. February 6th in Tampa saw Pat Tanaka beat Lou Perez, Jimmy Backlund beat Dean Malenko via submission, Kevin Sullivan double count out Kendall Windham, and Terminators beat Jerry Flynn and Firecat, Brady Boone. Lou Thez is talking about bringing the UWFI from Japan to the US. Rumor mill has it that Vern and Greg Gagne are looking at producing an amateur wrestling television show. Muscle Mag International in its gossip column had a funny item saying that Vince McMahon was trying to get 60 Minutes to investigate the NPC, the amateur arm of Joe Weider's IFBB, which is supposed to be a non-profit organization. Tony Rumble quit EQ after an apparent dispute with the Savoldis. Eddie Sharkey's PWA drew 1,600 at the Indian Center in Minneapolis on February 8 to see Charlie Norris, Larry Cameron, Brad Rheingans, Lightning Kid, and Derek Dukes. Bad news for Terry Funk, as the TV show Tequila and Bonetti hasn't fared too well, as the January 31st episode on CBS drew a 7.1 rating and 15 share, which is 79th place out of 94 primetime shows and in 3rd place among the 4 networks in the time slot. The LPWA pay-per-view show set for February 23rd is being advertised in cable guides around the country, but less than 2 weeks away, and we don't even have a site. They're charging $19.95 for the show, which should be the final nail in the coffin because at that price there will be very few buyers. Ultimate Warrior is doing a television commercial in the Carolinas for Slim Jim's beef jerky in his full gimmick. He still looks the same. Chris Love is scheduled to run weekly Saturday night shows in Kaufman, Texas using a lot of the Dallas area wrestlers that work for Global. February 7th in Caguas, Puerto Rico saw Bobby Davis beat El Exotico, Sasha beat Vanessa Dawn, El Bronco No. 1 beat Randy Rhodes, Carlitos Colon beat Fidel Sierra, Buddy Landell beat Roadblock, Dick Slater drew with Invader No. 1 and the Heartbreakers beat Kevin Von Erich and Rex King. February 7th in Portland, Oregon saw Colonel Dibiase beat C.W. Bergstrom, Amadrill beat Mike Winner, Jesse Barr beat Buddy Rose via DQ. The tag team title match with Ron and Don Harris vs. The Grappler and Steve Dahl ended in a double pin in the third fall with the belts now held up, and Brickhouse Brown beat John Rambo in a nunchucks match. Jesse Hernandez and Bob Bradley SR's Western States Wrestling Association on February 1st in San Bernardino drew 300 fans as Tim Patterson beat Louis Spicolli in 30 minutes in a Falls Count Anywhere in the Building match. John Studd is working with boxing promoter Don King out of the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas and looks to be getting involved in boxing management. Ben Masters Peach State Wrestling had a show on February 7th in Cordell, Georgia with Ron Garvin vs. Landell, Ranger Ross vs. Mr. Atlanta, the Blazers, Ray Lloyd and R.D. Swain vs. Dennis Gale and Steve Lawler, The Nightmare, Ted Allen vs. Dale Lucas, Mike Golden vs. Terry Leyland and more. February 8th in Clear Lake, California drew 850 for a show which included Cheryl Russo, Dementia, Jerry Monty and Jim Gorman beat Luscious Luke and Moondog Moretti, and Gerhard Kaiser beat Earthquake Ferris via DQ. Come disc jockey Dennis Erectus managed Kaiser, and Mike Lano did a heel ring doctor bit using the ring name Dr. Bernhardt S. Schwartz. Former Bay Area big-time wrestling promoter Roy Shire attended the show, which was said to have been the first live wrestling show Shire has attended in 10 years. Shire Hank Renner, television announcer in the 1970s, Kinji Shibuya, Japanese heel from late 50s to mid-70s, Pepper Gomez, who still holds the Bay Area wrestling attendance record with a crowd of more than 17,000 at the Cow Palace for a match against Ray Stevens, Monty, longtime jobber who dates from the 1960s to still jobbing on WWF television tapings today, and Kaiser, heel manager in the mid-1970s, appeared on Lano's public access television show. Renner, 60, was in sad shape after 2 strokes and apparently hardly remembered a thing about his stint as host of Big Time Wrestling. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling drew a reported 1,215 on February 7th in Brookhaven, Mississippi and 362 on February 8th in Liberty, Mississippi. Both shows were to be headlined by Helmut Hessler, SAP champion, against Junkyard Dog. Dog made the first show and put Hessler over, but no-showed the second night and Hessler beat Rusty Riddle. SAP has a television taping on February 29th in Clover, South Carolina with Wahoo McDaniel, The Patriot, Rob Van Dam, Rob Zakowski, and Neil Superior. Jack Veneno continues to promote pro wrestling in the Dominican Republic under the NWA banner, with the old NWA logo on the shows. Veneno bills himself as NWA World Light Heavyweight Champion. The only names that looked familiar on his cards were Hiroshi Hatanaka, who works for SWS as a prelim boy in Japan, and the Headhunters, who work Japan for Wing. Tom Reeder has a show March 21st in Lewiston, Idaho with the Barbarian vs. Coco Ware, and the rest of the guys are local workers from Southern California like Scott Basso, Louis Spicolli, Frankie Valdez, and Gary Key. WWF. The bodybuilding syndicated television show, which was scheduled to debut soon after the recent NAPI convention, was put on hold because TV stations weren't interested. Production of the syndicated show has been delayed until early 1993. However, they will have a bodybuilding show on the USA Network on Saturday mornings before the June WBF Championships in Long Beach. I don't believe Lex Luger will appear on that show, but instead debut in the 1993 WBF Championships and then wrestle for the WWF after that. Luger is said to be training twice a day and doing all that other stuff in abundance that one associates with competing in bodybuilding contests. Luger was asked to be a guest on Jim Ross' radio show this past Sunday, and apparently Luger never as a shoot returned any of Ross' calls, and Ross made a point of mentioning it on the air. February 7th in Denver drew 4,500 as Warlord pinned Chris Walker, bad. Shawn Michaels pinned Jimmy Snuka. Michaels looked very good in carrying it to a fair match. The Mountie pinned Jim Brunzel. Big Boss Man and Tito Santana beat Natural Disasters when Boss Man pinned Quake. Okay, Repo Man pinned Virgil with his feet on the ropes. Negative stars. Ted DiBiase and IRS won the WWF Tag Team titles from Legion of Doom, and Ric Flair beat Roddy Piper via DQ when Piper was caught using a chair after a ref bump that Flair had brought in the ring in a title versus title match. Great. No matter how many rumors are swirling, and there are many right now, I still don't buy for a second Hulk Hogan quitting after Wrestlemania. Best tentative plan is for the Flair-Hogan match to take place at SummerSlam, August 31st at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. But so much can happen between now and then that I wouldn't count on anything. Primetime Wrestling on February 3rd did a 3.0 rating, good, while All-American on February 2nd did a 2.1, so good. Latest reports we're getting on the Royal Rumble pay-per-view show is that it did a 1.8% buy rate, which would be the lowest of any WWF pay-per-view show ever, with the exception of Tuesday in Texas with the 6-day lead time. Sounds low to me, but a 1.8 would mean 320,000 buys, which would be approximately a $7.4 million gross, of which Titan's share would be $3.3 million. Advance for Wrestlemania in Indianapolis is just in excess of 20,000 tickets. February 9th in Las Vegas drew 4,000 as Warlord pinned Walker Dud. Michaels beat Silver Shadow, the guy who puts up the ring because Jimmy Snuka no-showed, -2 stars. Santana pinned Dibiase 1.5 star. Legion of Doom beat Natural Disasters via DQ 1 star. Bossman pinned IRS 1 star. Bounty pinned Brunzel 1.5 star. Repo Man pinned Virgil 1.5 star, and Flair beat Piper via DQ in a title versus title match with the same ending where Piper is caught with the chair 2.5 stars. February 10th in Sacramento drew 5,400 for a card in which Hawk, Dibiase, Kerry Von Erich, Snuka and Michaels all didn't work as advertised. Michaels and Hawk were in the building but didn't work for reasons of which I haven't a clue. Von Erich missed the entire weekend, which seems to be happening with more regularity of late. Snuka worked Denver and Los Angeles but missed the rest of the shots. No word on the others. No explanation was made to the crowd other than Dibiase wouldn't be there due to travel problems. Makeshift results, combined grades from several sources, saw Warlord pin Walker 1/2 star, Bossman and Legion of Doom Animal beat Disasters when Animal pinned Typhoon 1.75 stars, Flair beat Piper via DQ, same finish, which was also the same finish the last time Flair wrestled Piper in Sacramento, 3 stars, IRS pinned Brunzel 1.5 star, Repo Man pinned Virgil 1/2 star and Santana pinned Mountie 1.5 star. February 1st in Salt Lake City drew $6,280,000, as Tatanka pinned Skinner 1/2 star, British Bulldog pinned Berserker 1.5 star, Legion of Doom Animal pinned Earthquake 2.5 stars, Flair beat Piper via DQ 4 stars, Santana pinned Dibiase -4 stars, IRS pinned Bossman 1/2 star, and Beverly Brothers beat New Foundation 1 star. Give WWF credit for overtime work this weekend. They produced 2 sets of Superstars and Challenge shows over the weekend, one set for air dates on Saturday talking about the upcoming Saturday night main event and another for Sunday with commentary and inserts talking mainly about what happened last night. That's the difference between an organization committed to television perfection and one that just churns out television product. The Winnipeg Sun had an article on January 30th where Bob Moye, an offensive lineman with the Canadian Football League's Winnipeg Blue Bombers and a silver medalist in freestyle wrestling in the Olympics, talked about pro wrestling. They are charlatans and shams who couldn't wrestle their way out of a multiplication problem. Moye also estimated that 90% of the WWS wrestlers couldn't pass a drug test. After saying that, knocking the wrestlers for having cosmetic beauty and saying the guys wouldn't be able to survive against him or any good amateur heavyweight aerobically, he was then asked who the best athlete was among the wrestlers, and guess who he picked? Hulk Hogan. The worst athlete he picked? Big Boss Man. Kind of funny for a guy to talk about how muscles mean nothing when it comes to conditioning to then rank the big guys based on how their physique looks rather than their athletic ability, wouldn't you say? Titan returns to Baltimore after nearly 2 years away on April 25th in the arena that has been home almost exclusively for WCW. Lots of news regarding newcomers and contract dealings. The much talked about negotiations between Kip Fry and Jesse Ventura during the middle of last week haven't resulted in a deal at press time. It wouldn't be surprising for a deal to have been struck by the time you read this, however. WCW is offering Ventura a 2-year deal to work with Tony Schiavone on Worldwide Wrestling in syndication plus do color on all the clashes and pay-per-view shows. Missy Hyatt agreed to a new 2-year contract. Nikita Koloff was also inked this past week to return as a top singles babyface teaming with Sting and company against the Dangerous Alliance. Also expected to be headed in are Greg Valentine and Dick Slater as a heel tag team, though Lord only knows why. Scott Norton is supposed to be coming in as well, apparently as a babyface between Japan tours. There is also talk of signing Big Van Vader up to an exclusive full-time deal and having him give up his international commitments and push him as one of the lead group of heels against Sting. But given his sweet Japan deal, estimated at $200,000 per year for 12 weeks work, it'll take a major financial commitment, one would think. As for Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, they were in the office about 2 weeks back, but no deal was reached, although there is a lot of speculation about a feud with them and the Steiners down the road. No talk whatsoever regarding Marty Jannetty and/or Shane Douglas. January 30th in Cleveland saw Richard Morton beat Johnny B. Bad, Big Josh pinned Tracy Smothers, mainly stalling. Diamond Dallas Page pinned Joey Maggs, horrible. Steiners beat Cactus Jack and Buddy Lee Parker, great. El Gigante double count out with Big Van Vader, bad. Dustin Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat beat Bobby Eaton and Larry Zbyszko, great. And Rick Rude beat Sting via DQ with a dusty finish, great heat. Steve Armstrong is back in action after missing a few weeks with a knee injury. Medusa is out of action after a hernia operation after being injured on February 2nd in Philadelphia, and is expected back in a few weeks. After Wrestle War in Jacksonville on May 19th, the next pay-per-view will be June 27 out of Mobile, Alabama. There is also a clash scheduled for late June, and the Baltimore Bash will still be in mid-July, so apparently there are plans for a series of major events that require 3 major shows in less than a month. February 7th in Jacksonville drew $3,094 and $27,000. Combined grades from 2 sources, as Tailor-Made Man Terry Taylor beat Marcus Alexander Bagwell 2 stars, Bad pinned Morton 1 1/4 stars, Ron Simmons pinned Page 3/4 star, Steiners beat Young Pistols 2 1/4 stars, Abdullah the Butcher pinned Cactus Jack 1 star, Barry Windham pinned Zbyszko in a bull rope match 1 star, and Sting and Rhodes and Steamboat beat Rude and Eaton and Anderson in 18 minutes of a cage match when Sting pinned Eaton 3 1/2 stars. Tickets for the pay-per-view in Jacksonville go on sale first to the fans who attend the April 5th card, head-to-head with Wrestlemania on pay-per-view live. For those coming to Milwaukee for the pay-per-view from out of town, there will be a show the next afternoon in Chicago, March 1, at 3 p.m. at the UIC Pavilion, which is just 90 miles away, with Rude vs. Sting in a cage match, Abdullah vs. Cactus, Anderson and Eaton, and Austin vs. Steiners and Rhodes. In an elimination tag match, Windham vs. Zbyszko in a 1-fall death match. I've always thought those were contradictions in terms, Big Josh and Ron Simmons vs. Vinny Vegas, and the dreaded mystery partner, Tilman vs. Bad, News vs. Morton and Bagwell vs. Taylor. The same top 5 matches will be in this area on March 5th in Fort Ord, March 6th at the Forum in Los Angeles, and March 7th at the Kaiser Convention Center in Oakland, although I believe Rude Sting out here will simply be no DQ. Some talk of making Teddy Long, who is under contract but not doing anything, a color commentator. WCW main event on February 2nd did a 2.6 rating, while WCW on February 1st did a 2.4, lower than it had been doing, while Power Hour did a 1.6. Ventura caused a minor uproar on Cody Boyne's radio show on Wale in Providence 2 weeks back when the town of Fall River, Massachusetts was brought up, and Ventura said it was one of the only places he'd ever been to that was worse than Vietnam, which upset the mayor of Fall River, who found out about it during the week. El Gigante has returned home to Argentina because of his mother's funeral. February 2nd in Philadelphia drew 1,200 as Simmons pinned Parker 1 1/2 star, Taylor pinned Tom Zenk 2 1/4 stars, Steiners beat Vegas and Page 3 stars, Zbyszko pinned Bagwell 2 stars, Brian Pillman pinned Morton 3 stars, Sting and Rhodes and Steamboat beat Rude and Eaton and Anderson 4 stars, and Abdullah beat Cactus in a bloody cage match 3 3/4 stars. February 9th at the Omni in Atlanta drew 2,500 paid and $26,000, 4,200 in the building with comps, as Thomas Rich pinned Mags 1/4 star, Taylor pinned Josh due to outside interference from Harley Race 1/2 star, Mr. Hughes pinned PN News 1 star, Bad pinned Morton 1 1/4 stars, Steiners beat Young Pistols 3 1/2 stars, Windham pinned Zbyszko 2 stars, Sting and Rhodes and Steamboat beat Anderson and Eaton and Rude with Dusty Rhodes bull rope to Paul E. dangerously when Sting pinned Eaton when Windham interfered and hit Eaton with the telephone. Zbyszko jumped Dusty Rhodes on the floor and Windham was at ringside making the save for Dusty 3 stars, and Abdullah beat Cactus in a cage match 1/2 star. Hughes' suspension was lifted because WCW couldn't substantiate the charge